Welcome back. Our next speaker is new to the California Seth Conference, but he's no newbie when it comes to Seth. He's one of the original New York boys, so he was there when Jane was channeling Seth, right? I know many of us have imagined what that might be like, but this fellow was actually there. He was actually in Jane's ESP classes. Seth referred to him as the poet, and of course I am speaking of Barrie Gellis. Now, we'll kick things off with Barrie reading some of his poetry. And incidentally, the music you've been listening to was also created by Barrie and of course inspired by Seth. And so his talk is going to be, what is a victim in a world of creating your own reality, right? We know that Seth really brought in this idea of you create your own reality. So I'm really looking forward to how Barrie tackles this particular unique conundrum when you have reality creation and then the idea of what does that mean for personal responsibility and victimhood. So I'm super excited to see what he's got. He was there. He's been steeped in the material ever since Jane delivered it, which is pretty exciting to have him here now. And we will have a live Q&A with Barrie, so go ahead and type away your questions into the feed and we'll pick the best ones, and we're going to have a great interaction after he finishes his presentation. So let's bring a super warm California Seth Conference welcome to Barrie Gellis.
Okay, this poem is called Ode to Clearview and the New York Boys. Here's what you need to know about this poem. Clearview is a neighborhood in which almost all the New York boys lived. The others lived in the adjacent neighborhoods of Whitestone, Bayside, and Flushing. All of these neighborhoods are located in northeastern Queens, a borough in New York City, and 246 miles away from Elmira. Ode to Clearview and the New York Boys. Born in the 1950s, we danced with speed and quaaludes, stumbling down dark lanes of chrome onto basement couches to kiss on surrealistic pillows. Hair tossed off t-shirts and bounced off necks. We were a questing generation, dozing behind the wheels of Buicks and bicycles with our backs against the wall at Jerry's candy store. Our faces covered with scraggly beards, and girls hid birth control pills inside their dresser-drawer socks. We were religious pagans, inspecting shadows and pimples on sidewalk afternoons, who didn't understand what we understood, but felt that something had to change or explode, and soon. We walked around using our souls for money and gambled for keeps, believing we could actually lose. We tumbled to sleep some nights feeling forsaken and worthless. Blankets were 6 feet of dirt thrown over our graves. But we'd awaken remarkably refreshed the next afternoon. Religions had nothing to do with the gods we sought, as daily theologies of self based on compassion and vanity lived and died during nights of partying and driving home drunk in reverse on bits of ancient wisdom washed down with wine. We were the Mad Hatter's Temple of Decadence mixed with Donald Duck, cosmic consciousness mixed with comic books, Buddhism with basketball, and softball always waiting to be played under the illumination of the white light. We'd seen our eyes staring back in mirrored wonder, overwhelming and paralyzing each step we took into the soul, smashing against individuals tightroping a wounded America. We'd seen bags of nickel blood shot through bathrooms, splattering red and white porcelain, carrying blue dreams down drains. We'd seen glassine textbooks flood Jungian sewers and Campbell myths of high school ankles hiding tracks and bracelets of first love. Time crept in circles like a clock, ticking time off the first kiss, the first touch, the miracle of awareness that although we were fallible, the circumstances of existence were still pretty glorious. Even lost within death-wished nightmares, our sweaty eyes awoke, staring, pulsing to shapes on walls, silhouetting brains on fire, still wishing to live and search, despite chemical bakeries and amphetamine acres of skin. We took flight on the sweet bird of Paul Newman's blue eyes and Bilko's military yelp mocking draft boards, who finally got the word to avoid the strange boys from Clearview who roamed Utopia Parkway in their 4F madness. We prowled the streets alert to the wail of Cramden and mysticism of Topper and the ever desperate fighting of the sailor Popeye. We sang mass transit songs of blonde Johns and Greek Marias, popping pills and Pepsis, drooling second oils on their 12-year-old shoulders. We sang of rivalries young and old, of Gnostics and Harlem and hotel harlots, of Bay hillside grazing on Gallowport wine, where mad police stalked marijuana on scooters, scattering our bodies as residents angrily walked dogs in protest, hoping to properly place their pets' poop to make our gathering difficult by nightfall. This ode is for the angels of madness, the New York boys of Elmira's nighttime labyrinth descent, the crystals standing naked on the corners of Clearview, who somehow found ourselves arriving, breathing heavily, on the couch of a lady with two names, in a living room filled with the tobacco ghost of a spirit named Seth. This poem is the first poem I read aloud in my second Seth class. I had written it about a month before I went to class in the first place. I imagine that it was part of what led Seth to refer to me as our poet. It's called Me and You. A rotum of the scrotum in this day of liberation sets my life upon a knapsack to recline in hibernation. If castration and frustration are rolled up in one small ball, with a little indignation I may rise or I may fall. But first I'll sis and then I'll kiss as I'm taking off my clothes, and my mistress, she does likewise as my ballad leaps and grows. And we'll roll around in bed with our inhibitions shed as my hand massages nipples to a tune intensely panting, and her skin as smooth as marble, while as soft as silk or cotton, brings up memories of lovers not around, but not forgotten. And my eyes, they search the outline of my sweetheart stretched before me, as a goddess filled with love, filled with lust, and with emotions. So I stroke the tender moment with my memory and mind, and caress with sacred fingers hills and valleys that I find. And I finger and I linger where a touch creates a moan, and I smile for our bodies on the pillows that we own. Moisture blesses our caresses while excitement marches forward. Through the crowd of rumpled sheets, through the cheering of the springs, we are lured together, reaching, touching in a lover's magnet, feeling forces way beyond us, way above us, way within us, as our bodies intertwine. Penetrating while receiving is the state of her vagina and my penis stiffly meeting, ringing bells in God's abode. And the contact of our thighs, like a maestro's raging movements, with the blaring of the trumpets and the beating of the drums, times the pulsing of our oneness, times our mounting up with joy, times the coming of our climax as lightning frees the skies with pulsating rhythmic thrusts, as our pelvics rush together, as the roaring of the waves splash upon the open shore, and our arms encircle bodies, our minds throw off their rust, and they grasp each other dearly, and in mystical reunion greet their morning by adorning royal robes and flashing colors. Pounding rainbows echo inward, calling outward of our coming to our burning clenching hands and to all our trembling selves. Deep inside your grasping chamber thrusts my throbbing, pulsing penis, all encircling soul and spirit, mind and body, me and you. Fingers grasp eternal union as two lovers run together. Deep inside your darkened chamber, I reach out and embrace you. Halting, heightened, shaking movements leaves a momentary stillness as our eyes meet deep within ourselves. In this pause, a pouring climax flings us out in God's wet dream, and we fly around in joy, naked girl and naked boy. And we blend a blend as only total union, never lonely, can bestow upon this ever holy scene. And as one we gently rest, thigh on thigh and breast on breast, letting nighttime and its choir carry on, till a jingle filters through like a softly touching dew, which enfolds and holds its flowers till it's time to rise anew. I reach out to enfold you, me and you. Ode on Sex and Religion by Barrie Gellis. This poem was used by Sue Watkins in her book, Conversations with Seth. The first 10 lines of this poem she used. This is the whole poem. Ode on Sex and Religion. I think religions of the West misunderstand the naked breast. I think religions of the East love the soul, but hate the beast. Worldly gains and subjective slants have plagued the body of romance. Hundreds of years of fear and guilt have come from what the mind has built and then passed off as godly laws. I curse the nuns and bless the whores. We've had witches destroyed in fires and women's freedoms enslaved by liars who distorted symbolic Eve and taught that blackness meant to grieve. The souls who searched for truth enjoyed were systematically destroyed. Religions, keep your hands off man. Self-abuse will outlive your plan to create a race of human souls, afraid of sense, condemning holes. Is physical gratification self-mistreatment? The connotation. We've learned well the definitions, putting down human conditions. To hell with that. The secret's loose. Sex is divine. It's called self-use. Our bodies were made to glisten with sweat. We must learn to listen to gifts of nature in our skin. The mind is only half the twin. The torso is the other part. Their issue is the human heart. I hope that all oppressions fail and every Christ denied his nail, that swains and homosexuals are freed from the closed-minded roles which plague them in these modern days. Give lovers privacy and praise. I hope that love in every form finds those who need to be kept warm, while those who need the chill of night find darkness when they look for light. The aggregate of all my thought, man's woes began when gods were bought. Seth, July 73. There are no divisions between the portions of the self. There is no ceiling to your head or to your mind. You are not enclosed by your skin or by your age. These are open. Your skin connects you to the earth, and it connects you to far more than even your creaturehood. Now, that was 1973. This next poem was written in April 1972, months before I ever heard of Seth, and about a year and a half before Seth said that. This poem is called Chair Blending. Chair Blending. Rooting out into all things, your feet melt into the grass. Your head becomes the sky and clouds. Your hands blend into buildings and trees, and your body becomes the universe. An invisible transformation no one sees takes place, an expansion of yourself, an expansion of mind, a growth and a shrinkage, a blossoming and a dying. Your body sprouts grass, rustled by the wind. Your arms are the uterus the world implants itself in. Your head is the sun. Your eyes are the stars. Your feet are the seas. It's a gratifying feeling, sitting in a chair, becoming the world. It's quite a change of environment from looking at four walls to being the four walls. A certain freedom arises. All of a sudden, you are not you. You are not there. But at the same time, you are there bigger than ever. Another person walks into your silent room and sees you sitting there and wonders what you are doing. You see her standing there and you see yourself in her, and you too are standing there, but not wondering a thing. She tries to jolt you back to the confines of your body with suction cup sounds. You're pulled from the walls, the grass, the wind, back to your one chair, staring at a woman by your doorway, pronouncing your name. You can't be angry with her. You look at her and smile and ask her what she wants, what's new, and then she goes. And you wait once again for your arms to grow into the wings of the world and your eyes to become the breeze. Intrinsic Artists by Barrie Gellis. Sue Watkins used this in her book, Conversations with Seth. In a time when men's minds cannot see through walls, surfaces have a flirtatious role. Our sensuous eyes serve visions as a fillet of form into which our thoughts slice. With invisible ideas, we bite and mold landscapes, then live on our creations as proud artists showing off their masterpieces.
Hi, my name is Barrie Gellis, and I am an original member of the SETH classes held in Jane's apartment in Elmira, New York. I started SETH class in 1972 and have been studying the SETH material for 50 years. I was one of the New York boys, as the class soon referred to us. This presentation answers the question, what is a victim in a world of creating your own reality? I will combine three questions together. Do we create our own reality? What does that actually mean? And if a victim creates his own reality, is it the victim's fault that he or she was beaten, raped, robbed, murdered, and so forth? In short, what is a victim in a world of creating your own reality? This presentation will be followed by a live question and answer period in which you may ask about any SETH concept you want to discuss, clarify, or challenge. And anyone who wishes to contact me at any time with comments or questions, please email me at bargell@aol.com. That's BARGELL@aol.com. Thank you very much. Okay, let the festivities begin. As to the triple-decker sandwich question, do we create our own reality? According to the SETH material, the answer is yes. I believe most folks have heard or used this expression without much thought about what it may actually mean or not mean. This has perhaps unintendedly created a plush spiritual field in which to sow a wide variety of notions and conflicts that may reap great confusion and hostility. So, for clarification, and for the sake of this presentation, here is how I will define you create your own reality. You create your own reality means that you don't live a life of random events that happen to you. Rather, things happen for a reason and a purpose. And how or why is that? According to the theory, it is because you telepathically and subjectively attract specific people and events to you based on your beliefs, emotions, and expectations. And then what unfolds is based on continuous telepathic subconscious agreements. Simple example. You are standing on a corner and drop your wallet. A stranger walks by, notices your wallet on the floor, taps you on the shoulder and asks, pointing to the sidewalk, "Is that your wallet?" Your daydreaming interrupted. You are surprised by the question. Look down, see the wallet, and say, "Oh yes, thank you so much." Before you can move, the stranger bends down, picks up your wallet, and hands it to you, saying, "Here you go." Again, you say thanks as the stranger walks away. This is a brief, perfect example of reality creation, or of you create your own reality. How does it work? Beliefs and telepathic communication are always in play. So let's play with that idea. Let's say that subconsciously or consciously, you have a belief that people are good and can be trusted. So one day, you subconsciously drop your wallet so that this belief can be successfully acted out. And then you can point to the experience and say, "See, people are good and trustworthy." The belief comes first, and then the experience follows. So you telepathically send out the call for someone who wants to act in a good and trusting way. He has his own intimate beliefs in play as to why he would want to be involved in such an event. For example, let's say that someone once helped him out, and now he wants to return the favor to people, while simultaneously you want someone to act good. Or let's say that he used to be a thief, and now he wants to change his ways, and on and on. It could be one of an infinite number of beliefs. In any case, this person answers your telepathic call as you have answered his call, using ongoing telepathy, which occurs nonstop between everybody all the time, or so the theory goes. The subconscious telepathic communication and agreements must always first occur before any and all events that we find ourselves in can even be physicalized. So back to our event. As the stranger approaches you, the creation and co-creation of the event is already set in motion, with the participants all along using their free will and telepathy every step of the way, in order for the ongoing agreements to be made. Shoulder gets tapped, yes and thank you said, and the stranger goes his way. As you put your wallet back in your pocket, event over. Belief physicalized and strengthened in your mind as a fact. You go back home and tell your friends, "See, I told you people were good. The guy handed me back my wallet." This is a simple model for all types of events, including the most complicated, intricate ones, the most loving ones, violent ones, weather-related ones, mass shootings, plane crashes, joyful weddings, so-called chance meetings of two people who end up getting happily married for 50 years, and on and on. Just as an example, and to switch the early event to its negative, you have already dropped your wallet. The stranger comes along, but this time says nothing. He picks up your wallet and walks off with it, thus stealing your wallet. For this negative event to occur, a whole different set of beliefs would need to be in play. For example, you believe that people are bad and can't be trusted, or you believe that you are bad and you don't deserve to be happy. In any case, the stranger wants to steal money. So the telepathic calls go out in all directions and get answered, as the event is set in motion with free will always in play. I emphasize free will because it is crucial to what ultimately happens in all events. The future is not written in stone. Just because you telepathically attracted someone to steal your wallet does not obligate the attracted person to do so. This whole event may be his way to telepathically get himself involved in an event in order to make the physical choice in the first place to not steal, and to telepathically say to you as the event unfolds, no, I will not steal your wallet. I originally intended to, but I changed my mind. Instead, I volunteer to give it back to you. Thanks for giving me this choice. If you still want someone to steal your wallet and offering me the choice to change my mind was not enough, then go find another time, place, and person to act out the theft with you, because I don't want to do it. This whole experience is what I call the event equation, with the potential victim on one side and the potential perpetrator on the other side. Note, the two sides are not equal. There is one crucial, major factual difference between the two sides. The victim side involves subconscious choices and motivations. He does not consciously want, nor has he consciously agreed to have someone steal his wallet. On the other hand, the potential perpetrator side involves making conscious choices with possible conscious inner reflections, such as, I wanted to steal the wallet. Do I go ahead now and take the wallet or not? Yes or no? The differences between these two event equation sides can't be ignored. They are key to contemplating what a victim is and how reality creation fits into the event, whatever that event is. And before I go on, time to take a drink. This is water from earth. Very good. Okay. If you think for a minute, in no other way could this potential perpetrator, this stranger, face the conscious choice to steal a wallet or not. If you both did not telepathically attract each other based on each of your own intimate beliefs, and also then agreed with whatever choices are made in the interaction as your thoughts intertwine. As I said, free will is always in play in making all ongoing choices, as all ongoing events unfold. These were two brief examples modeling you create your own reality. They are actually two brief examples of the mechanism behind how you create your own reality. And regardless of how many people are involved in any ongoing shared canvas of creation upon which the participants interact, nothing is done without telepathic agreement between all of the participants and with all those who know the participants. If this was not the case, then all those who know people who have been hurt would not be creating their own reality, but would rather find themselves involved in seemingly random situations in which people they know, care about, and or love have been hurt. Thus, they and all of us would be random victims of being randomly hurt and upset because people we know got hurt. Speaking of agreements, let me remind you, the viewer, you may agree with this concept or not, for that is up to you. And in your ongoing search for your truth, always trust your heart, soul, self, or whatever it is you wish to call it, over what anyone else tells you, over me in this presentation, over Seth in his books, or the fire hydrant on a particularly drunken walk home, or a particularly talkative fire hydrant. In any case, that's how the theory of you create your own reality goes, as far as events are concerned and as far as I understand it. Perhaps the most misunderstood seed planted in the plush spiritual field of reality creation concerns the simple New Age phrase, there are no victims. Here are the two obvious sides. There are no victims versus there are victims. Both sides agree on three things. One, that the case is adamantly closed on whichever side you're on. Two, the other side is wrong. And three, both sides can't be right because the contradictions are clear and unavoidable. To use an analogy, but without these loaded, emotional, painful words about victims versus no victims, which have led to more endless, angry, deal-breaking disputes within relationships, families, and friends, with differing New Age, religious, atheistic, agnostic, and/or science-minded folks, there are more disputes between them than had occurred between farmers and cattle ranchers, between vegans and trophy hunters, between slow drivers in the fast lane versus everybody else, all combined. To see how divisive and emotionally feud this controversy can become, let's take the tragic topic of murder. The automatic, surface, and simple New Age spiritual logic goes as follows. You agreed to be murdered, therefore you cannot be a victim, because you agreed to it and nothing is random. And the logical and understandably disgusted, grunt-filled retort to this is, who the hell would agree to being murdered? Things definitely are sometimes random, and worse, you are blaming the victim. And even worse than that, my mother was murdered, you son of a bitch. Are you telling me that she wanted it? That it was her fault? How sick are you? Okay now, time to relax and sit back down for a moment. Allow me to introduce another brief analogy here in order to explain how two contradictory things may both be correct. This analogy is not like a murder, as it is totally unemotional and involves not an act, but a totally safe, unharmful, non-human object. And yet, it employs the same type of reasoning and seeming contradictions. This is what makes it an analogy. This involves the chair upon which you may be seated and the dirty spiritual word science. Two black and white opposite positions may be taken here. The chair is obviously solid. No, the chair is obviously not solid at all. So it's solid versus not solid, just like it was victim versus no victim. But both cannot be true, or can they? It is black and white obvious that the chair is solid. Quote, for Christ's sake, I'm sitting my butt on it right now, looking at you like you're an idiot, unquote. But there is another perspective when you throw in the view of quantum science. From this perspective, it is black and white obvious to say, quote, of course you think it's solid because you don't know anything about quantum science. The chair is actually made up of invisible, swirling energy of quantum foam, superstrings, or who knows what else. But one thing is for certain, the chair is anything but solid, end quote. So how can these two contradictory positions both be true? Well, because they are both true. From the classic science point of view, according to our five senses, the chair is totally solid. Look out for splinters and don't bang your head against it. But from the non-physical quantum perspective, there is no chair at all. And whatever it is certainly not solid. But both sides are true, and there is no contradiction. One perspective does not supersede, sabotage, or undermine the other perspective. No need to fight or argue. Instead, you can celebrate your newfound agreement and go out for a pitcher of beer sitting on bar stools that don't exist. Yet, you will enjoy the experience anyway. And as it is with the chair, so it is with the victim. According to the reasoning of the five senses, the harmed person is a victim from the perspective of everyday waking life. But if you throw in the telepathic subconscious agreement perspective, then no victim exists. Both are true, and there are no contradictions. One perspective does not supersede, sabotage, or undermine the other. So it is actually pretty simple to combine these two ideas with this one definition. A victim is someone who does not consciously want to be harmed and who has not consciously chosen or agreed to be harmed and had no reasonable expectation to consciously think that the harm would occur. The given mechanics of reality creation are still in play. The victim has still telepathically and subconsciously agreed to give the potential perpetrator the choice to murder him or not, and to telepathically accept whatever the person's ultimate conscious choice will be, while simultaneously remaining totally unconscious of these telepathic agreements. The person is a victim according to the definition given, because the other person consciously chose to harm this person without that person's conscious permission or expectation. It must be remembered that the term victim is not unusual, in that it is one of those many words that we regularly use and otherwise accept each day in order to experience and then assess events solely and only from the perspective of the physical plane. In this case, the word victim differentiates between who has been hurt by another person or thing, like in a murder, accident, national disaster, or some mass attack, and so forth, against his conscious desires, wishes, and wants, and who has not. I believe, rightly or wrongly, that most New Age folks have never thought about what I am about to say in this particular context. But there are many and other similar type words and objects and concepts which also only concern physical perspective and experience in order to assess and navigate solely within the physical plane. Words, objects, and concepts that do not exist in the non-physical realm and have absolutely no emotional charge or connection to harming anyone. And so we all just basically accept them. For example, linear time. Linear time only exists in physical reality, yet New Age groups will accept with no arguing or questioning that their meeting will start at 1 p.m. And no one gets their panties in an uproar that there really is no such thing as 1 p.m. Linear time is our human concept of time in physical reality, and that time appears to progress in a chronological order and line. This means that events appear to happen one after the other, and 1 minute occurs after the other. And this minute, I will now take another water break. I'll go to the water break spot. Okay. Can't get it closed, so it'll close in another reality. All right, so I left off where events appear to happen one after the other and 1 minute occurs after the other. This is opposed to simultaneous time, which occurs in non-physical realities, such as in dreams, out-of-body states, and other non-physical alternate experiences. In simultaneous time, there is no linear order from past to present to future. Rather, you can blink blend or flicker from one time and place to another. For example, in a dream, you may find yourself a child in a neighborhood park in 2022. And in the next instant, you may find yourself as a soldier in a trench fighting in World War I. You may find that you switch back and forth each instant from one to the other and back again in a blink blend or flicker as the dream events unfold. But the idea of victim versus no victim is much different and much more intense than the idea of linear time, because life and death are involved. So this is why the painful contentious and controversial questions are thrown into play. Do violent things suddenly and randomly happen with no purpose or meaning? And what is a victim in a world of reality creation? Unlike the concept of 1 p.m., which may have many pleasant memories and experiences of lunchtime pizza and daylight attached to it, the concept of victim, by definition, involves great pain, physical or mental, and maybe a lifetime of loneliness, unlike a 1 p.m. get-together. So when it comes to victims, everything in reality creation gets put under the hot spotlight and microscope. The idea of no victim in a murder, let's say, is difficult to fathom or accept because it takes the alleged subconscious willingness to be hurt on the part of the victim and then compares it to the conscious choice and willingness of the killer to act and hurt another. These two mind events are two very different things and are not equal, yet they are both parts of the event equation. The expression, "there are no victims," conflates an equivalence between what one person subconsciously agrees to and how another person consciously chooses to act out to that subconscious agreement. The key thing to remember here is that telepathically agreeing to be hurt does not compel or obligate the potential hurter to perform the potential act. It actually just offers this potential harmer the choice to say, yes, I will act, or no, I won't act. Thus, it is important to remember that this subconscious agreement that creates the concept of no victim does not excuse, remove, or minimize the wrongness of the person who consciously chooses to perform the harmful act. Nor does it mean that it is okay or justified to harm others based on that theory, that, quote, they are not victims because they agreed to it. This is what is or may be so difficult to ascertain on both sides of the argument. Are there victims or not in physical reality? Are New Age folks as dense and cruel as they seem to be? Are regular folks so dense and blind in regard to deeper expansive truths? To successfully answer these questions takes understanding and empathy on both sides of the event equation. For one thing, it is a false belief that it is okay to hurt others because they agree to it, and that there really are no victims. This false belief conflates and compares a subconscious mechanism to a consciously chosen act. To bring this all back to the Seth material, Seth did say that you create your own reality. And he also said violence is never justified. But he never said violence is always or sometimes justified because of reality creation. And even Seth, who ushered in the modern New Age movement, introducing the idea of reality creation, uses the word victim in his books and in class when speaking in everyday practical terms of victims of war, natural disasters, and crimes. Because the term victim involves and includes solely assessing the physical realm, situations, and events that you've attracted to yourself and find yourself in. Seth, session 145. You see perhaps havoc within the physical field, and this is indeed to be faced and dealt with and set straight as aid is given to the victims of a hurricane. Seth, session 414. There are close psychological connections in all cases that bring together the slayer and the victim, and these are known to the inner self. The stature and meaning behind the victim, RFK in this quote, adds to the horrible nature of the act. The point would not be nearly as clearly made were the victim a man giving himself to crime. In other words, if someone was killed who was a criminal, it won't draw that much attention. But when someone like RFK got killed, the point is clearly made. Seth obviously knows and has explained the concept of how there are no victims. Yet, he has never said anything like, there are no victims, and so violence is always or sometimes justified because the person agreed to it. In fact, he warns against that type of thinking. Seth, session 550. You cannot say the poor are poor simply because they chose poverty, and therefore there's no need for me to help them. This attitude can easily draw poverty to you in the next experience, end quote. So yes, there are victims, and yes, there are no victims. And you may as well add, and yes, the chair is solid, and yes, the chair is not solid. And both are true, and there are no contradictions. So, when Seth readers or any New Age folks say or demand there are no victims, they should be aware of the understandable confusion and outrage that may cause, because they are speaking about the expansive reality, analogy quantum reality. But the people hearing them are thinking about the everyday physical reality, analogy classic reality. And these two very different perspectives or starting points should never be forgotten. Otherwise, it can easily cause people to not understand each other at all, as well as to not understand reality creation in full. But to give credence to both sides, it is also important to realize that being a victim still means that you create your own reality, and that events are still not random, and that you still did subconsciously and telepathically both attract the situation and agreed to being hurt. Or rather, telepathically agreed to whatever choice the potential perpetrator ultimately makes. But it also means that you are a victim from the sole physical perspective, in that you had no conscious desire to be hurt and made no conscious choice to be hurt. And you had no reasonable expectation that you were going to be hurt. And that is what being a victim is, from the sole physical perspective, as perceived by the five senses. And as Seth says, that which we perceive with the five senses is real. Seth, session 266. What you perceive with your physical senses is, of course, real. It is one of the forms that reality takes. But if you insist upon believing that only physical data is real, then you will never learn what is within it. Seth, 285. The root assumptions that govern physical reality are indeed valid, but within physical reality alone, they do not apply elsewhere. Seth, session 759. Existence has a physical version. In that framework, you are born and die, and in a definite sequence. Death is a physical reality. It is real, however, only in physical terms, end quote. And water break. In physical terms. Okay, go back a bit. It is real, however, only in physical terms, end quote. And so the term victim is one of those useful and practical terms that we, and even Seth, uses to discuss and assess the physical aspects of any harmful or joyful events we attract. Seth, class 1969. You are meant to look at your physical condition, to compare it against what you want and what is good, and change the inner self accordingly. Seth, class 1971. You are meant to judge physical reality. You are meant to realize that physical reality is a materialization of your thoughts and feelings and images. Seth, this is the last one, I believe, session 635. Many of your problems result from the fact that you do not accept the responsibility of your own consciousness. It is meant to assess the reality that is unconsciously formed in direct replica of your thoughts and expectations, end quote. And by the way, this explains why Seth does sometimes use the term victim when discussing the F1 perspective, while at the same time, he says that there are no victims while discussing the expansive F2 perspective. Also, by the way, without this judging and assessing of physical reality, the concepts of violations and natural guilt could never even exist. Now, let's discuss the heated, controversial concept of blame and fault. Mechanisms of reality are at play here. And in the same way, there is no blame involved regarding the chair being solid or not. There is no blame involved regarding a person being a victim or not. This no victim concept does not include blaming the victim. Rather, it explains the background as to how the physical harm comes to be actualized on the physical plane in the first place, or what is behind the appearance of a victim. It is just like how quantum science explains what is behind the appearance of a solid chair in the first place. And on the other side of the event equation, the perpetrator is to blame for what he consciously chooses to do. And this is where natural guilt and violations come into play. We are hardwired to help and not hurt. In the Seth's concept of violations and natural guilt is a human instinct we gave ourselves. It is an inner tugging we feel in linear time's pause of reflection, not to repeat a harmful act or a violation. So you're going to repeat a harmful act, you're going to hit the person again, and then there's a moment of reflection that is tugging you. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. You know, we could ignore this or not, but it's there. And this is part of what Seth calls natural guilt. By the way, this is why linear time is so important, for it gives us the chance to even have a pause of reflection. It gives the person who is attracted to harm the opportunity to make his conscious choice to harm or not, an opportunity that could not exist without the subconscious telepathic agreement and consent of the victim. Therefore, the concept of being a victim always must include the awareness of the differences between subconscious agreements and conscious choices. And that all of this includes the idea that nothing is random, even when things appear to be random, via our reason, logic, and thought based on our five senses, or on classic science alone. For practical, operational reasons, we must generally keep our awareness of the non-physical spiritual subconscious, quote, quantum realm, separate from the physical realm so that it doesn't supersede and denigrate the physical conscious classic realm. Also, they are intimately and always connected. We separate these two realms in our mind so that we can learn our lessons not to harm others. Seth, session 498. The horror and the results of mismanagement and the vulnerability are the teaching methods that each consciousness has accepted before entering your system. In no other field of reality are the terms so drastic. For this reason, the inner self withholds much of its knowledge. There must be no leaning upon the very basic fact that behind and within the system there is relief. You must believe in the physical reality and accept the vulnerability, end quote. And also, we separate these two realms for very practical reasons. For example, so that we can say, I'll meet you at 1 p.m. and not get confused or in a big fight over it because linear time and 1 p.m. really don't exist. Nor would we ever be able to peacefully say, give me a glass of water, or in my case, a bottle of water. Nor would we ever be able to peacefully say, give me a glass of water, because physical reality and its objects also don't exist in the non-physical realm. while at the same time, we actually are simultaneously in both realms. We are in both realms. And you will get thirsty and need water, even though neither exist. And so we do say things like 1 p.m. and glass of water when we are thirsty and at other times. We don't stop saying them because they are solely physical terms. We are aware that there is a glass of water and there is a 1 p.m., even though they don't exist from the soul non-physical perspective. And so finally, to summarize, there's absolutely no contradiction or blame involved that 1 p.m., a solid chair, and a glass of water simultaneously exist and don't exist. And likewise, there's absolutely no contradiction or blame involved that being a victim and not being a victim both simultaneously exist and don't exist. And this is the end of my presentation, although there are no ends. So, thank you all very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and so let's let the questions and comments commence if there are any. Thank you.
Take us. Hello, everyone. So we're here backstage, which is now becoming the real stage here with Barrie, and we're getting ready for our live Q&A. So thank you, Barrie, for joining us. It's really exciting to have you here, both in the conference and live in the Q&A. And thank you, Virginia, the co-host. So I'm going to dive right in here, right? Because it's a very powerful talk and you've got a lot of questions coming in. So first one is one of the most recent ones by Leah. She's asking, for those of us who understand how do we create our own, that we do create our own reality, how do we dig our way out of guilt when we do create a negative victimhood experience? And we can add to that, how do we move out of victim consciousness, from victim consciousness into creating our own reality? So go ahead, take it away.
You don't have to change your mind. I mean, you have to put your two thoughts together. If you're feeling guilty, there's probably other reasons connected to it, or maybe that are being brought up to why you're feeling guilty. Like you're a bad person, you've done things wrong, you've hurt people. So there's always beliefs behind it. So I would say you got to discover the beliefs behind why you're feeling guilty, or else you could kind of cover them all with one sweeping belief is that, I believe that there's nothing to feel guilty about. Now, let me just say, depending upon what we're talking about, if you're feeling guilty about, you did something terrible, you told your friend her husband was cheating with somebody else and he wasn't, and they got divorced or got into a big fight, you can feel bad about that. You did something, quote unquote wrong. You made a mistake. So it's not like never feel guilty, but sometimes, I don't know, the percentage, we can feel guilty about things that we really, in my opinion, shouldn't feel guilty about. So it depends on the situation, but it always will involve beliefs. And I don't think there's something wrong with sometimes feeling, guilty about something you did. As long as you keep in mind you're still a good person that did something you don't like, what you did.
Yeah, this is a really deep topic, and we could spend an hour on guilt alone. But I remember Seth mentioning this idea of natural guilt, that when we do something that's out of alignment with who we prefer to be, there's this period where we can say, I want to do something different, but we don't dwell on it. We don't beat ourselves up, right? We choose to make a change.
Natural guilt isn't when we do something that we don't believe we are. Natural guilt is something when you do something that goes against your nature of love, compassion, and goodness.
Right. That's exactly what that means. Yeah.
But a person could, think that that's fine. That they might think who I am is someone who, anyway, it's a fine point. It's a difference between, so that's what natural guilt is anyway.
Right. And you're out of alignment with, your true natural self, which is love and compassion and all that.
What you consciously see is who you want to be. You might want to be a tough guy that, you might want to be Will Smith, a tough guy that's going to help and protect, whatever. So even his
beliefs now, yeah.
In other words, your conscious beliefs aren't involved with natural guilt. Natural guilt is a inner tugging. Mm-hmm. Something, no matter how justified you feel, I'm going to punch this person again. Then there'll be this moment of reflection. That's why we have linear time, one of the reasons. So we have a moment of reflection, something saying, no, don't do that. No matter how right you feel, that's not what you should do. So anyway, that to me is the concept of natural guilt and violations. And violations is violating your own nature.
Right. Being out of step or out of alignment with who we truly are. So yeah, it's an important distinction. And we could probably just spend an hour on that one. But the other component of that is, how do we go into understanding and using you create your own reality versus being immersed in guilt, right? As the original question is, how do we dig our way out of guilt, right?
Well, it's beliefs. You can't dig your way out of guilt if you believe that you should be guilty.
Right, of course.
Understand what your beliefs are, and then replace them with the opposite belief or whatever you like to. Or you could do the sweeping belief. Instead of going into particulars, you could come up with like a core belief that I shouldn't feel guilty. Again, like I said, though, it depends upon what you're feeling guilty about and how you interact with that. But you should always feel you're still a good person. Man, you can feel guilty and still believe you're a worthy and deserving person who has the right to be happy, but I really screwed up, and I feel bad about it. Is feeling bad feeling guilty? I don't know, but that's what I'm talking about. I feel bad. I banged your car up when I was backing, trying to park it for you. Well, who knows? So yeah, it's not just the black and white issue as I see it.
Right. And then it's always like, how do we use that to make a more conscious choice in the future, right?
Mm-hmm. But always remember, like the base you're doing everything on the stage should be that you're a worthy and deserving person who has a right to be happy. And the same is true with the people you're dealing with, even if you hate their guts. They're still worthy and deserving people who, depending upon how they're acting, you might not like them at all.
Right.
With that in mind, that helps.
That definitely helps. So let's go ahead, and because we have such a limited time here, let's go to Yoki's question. It's a privilege. Let's see. Did you experience Seth as being somewhat severe at times, right? So this harkens back to your experience with Seth. How did you experience Seth, and did you experience him as being severe at times?
These words are a little tricky. Uh-huh. So I would say he's not. He was firm. He looked you in the eye when he was speaking, and it's either our projection onto him or something in his eyes, or if that's possible. And if he had something to say and you didn't like it and you felt like it was challenging you, you might subjectively feel, well, you're being too severe. Mm-hmm. But he just seemed, I would say a better word is, he was like sure of himself and he was sincere.
Mm-hmm. And firm. Mm-hmm.
And overall, there was, again, I don't know projection or not, but there was a love in his behavior towards us.
That's awesome.
Kind of as a follow-up for that, Barrie, you want to say anything else about just your actual experience of Seth and then Jane and what that was like, that kind of interplay or anything in that territory?
It was like two different people. Mm-hmm. When Jane's around, she's kind of bubbly here. I'm reading this. She's very also smart. So and she could be flighty and she could be totally serious, talking about all these deep, different things. But it's basically her own high voice. Not that she was high, but her tone was high. And then when Seth would come through, he'd take, Seth is here now. So Seth would come through, and everybody would know it, and it would just be a different demeanor, a different voice, a different look. Everything would be different. And sometimes Seth would finish speaking, but he would stay in the class. He was there like a member of the class, kind of just listening. And that was always, I don't know, a nice blending of both realms in a way. But when Jane came out, she'd go, like on the video there, I'm back. Okay, here I am. Jeffrey, not our Jeffrey here, but Jeffrey, what happened? She would always ask, because she might be aware of images, like, there was a tree and I was a bird, wherever she went. Mm-hmm. But she didn't really consciously remember any detail about what was said. And I was always glad that they never called on me for that, because I know my mind would be blank. They'd say, Barrie, what did he say? And I'd have no idea. I don't know. And I was free from that because they never called. What did Seth say? But Is that Virginia? Want to ask a follow-up on that? Or? I mean, you spoke for some. I don't know who. If anybody wants to ask a follow-up to anything, please feel free.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that, which is, was there a palpable shift in the room when Seth came in? I mean, there were the visual cues of Jane, but was it an energetic?
There'll be a room. And unlike Seth board people, they don't want any arguments. Everything has to be peaceful. You're disrupted. Class was lively. There were people who were drinking wine, some people. I was one of them, but smoking and cursing, and you get into an argument. What do you mean talk about? That's a ridiculous thing. How can you even say that? And this and that, blah, blah. But when Seth came through, everybody just shut up. Everybody just got quiet because everybody knew what Seth had to say. So, again, what you could think of it like? It's like you're having people sleep over and you're all arguing and fighting and playing, and then you hear the parents come in and you act like you're sleeping or you act quiet. It was kind of like that. It's a metaphor. Nobody put it.
Cool. All right. Well, go on, Virginia.
I was just going to say, Barrie, anything you want to say about how your thoughts, experiences, ideas about Seth have evolved kind of over a period of time from being one of the New York boys to now?
Yeah, it's hard to think about how they evolved. I'd have to go back and try to remember how they were exactly. But I know they have evolved. Now, I have written, I'm a poet, but I have like 4,000 poems about plus. Mm-hmm. I keep them on my bookshelf back there in these binders that you can open up, spring binders. Mm-hmm. And they're by year. And they're in chronological order in the book. So it's like it goes from 65, 69, 72. But when I read these, they also work as like a poetic journal. Mm-hmm. I am in touch with how I felt. I think most people don't have that. They remember I used to be that way, and now, there's no really direct connection. Now they're this way, and there's this big gap. And anyway, mm-hmm. So the only thing I could say, I know, I don't know since Seth's class, things, I don't know. I mean, when my son was killed in a hit and run accident in 1996, he was 25. And this was the first real test I had of my beliefs, like at this level, and they work. There's certain questions you'll never ask if you don't believe, that death isn't the end, and everything happens for a reason. You go, oh no, I can't believe this. This is not real, and you're right. It's not real. What you think is real about death being the end is not real. And other people who are kind tell you, oh, you have to face reality. No, he's gone. And they're trying to be helpful. But the initial, oh now, is like your soul's, oh no. It's like your soul screaming, yeah, you're right. Oh no, this isn't happening. What you think is happening isn't happening. Mm-hmm. Once you have the idea there are no accidents, you can then start asking, well, why did it happen? What am I have to use it in quotes, getting out of it. What did he, why did we agree to it? Mm-hmm. That whole direction can't occur unless you believe that there's no death, even though in physical death there is, and also things happen for a reason. You make choices. You're a part of why it happened. So that was it in practice. I'm sure though certain beliefs must have developed or whatever, but time about like 40-something years. I don't remember my specific beliefs in 1975, let's say, on a particular issue, although I could look at some poems and let you know. But I don't have this feeling of, I have this, and also I don't, with linear time and stuff, I do believe in linear time and it's important, but it does affect the way I look at anniversaries and things like that. So to me, a question like that is kind of in the now, even though I know it was years ago and stuff. Think about that.
Well, all right. So let's see if we can squeeze one more question in here. I'll let you choose which one you want to work with. One is from Jairon. I believe he's all the way from Cuba. He's doing a research on prostitution, and interestingly, your poems had some mentions of sex, and so he's wondering if Seth had said anything about prostitution. That's one. So you can pick which one you want. And this other one is from Helen. And she's had an experience where she's lost her wallet twice and had to rebuild her driver's license twice. And she's kind of asking, a new identity or self, and any comments about that. So pick whichever one you want and just run with it.
He's not saying anything about prostitution. He says about hurting others, that, that's, so it depends upon the form of the prostitution, the interaction, I would say. About losing your wallet, I just recently lost my wallet, not my wallet, my driver's license. I think it's in the house. I went through this whole thing. I finally got a temporary replacement. So, but I don't understand exactly the question. I'd like to.
She's asking, does this point to, she's creating a new identity for herself by having to go and get a new license?
If she's going to change drastically, now that I have my new license, I now feel, I want to be a dancer again, or I want to be a painter, or I now love Tom Cruise, who I didn't love. Then it changes you. But if I would guess, and it's just my ignorance on the topic, on the person, not that I know, I would just guess you lost it, and it had something to do with possessions and losing things. But it's up to you
to define it.
The arbiter, is that word, of the reasons behind it. Not me, but it could be anything. It could be an infinite number of things.
And it also could be anything that we make of it, right? How we define it. Yeah.
It's up to you. It's what you make of it. It's why it happened. Well, you would ask yourself. I'm sure you did. If she's there, I don't know if she's there. Why did it happen? Why do you think you lost your wallet? And even twice or three times. Maybe you don't think you could drive well. I don't know.
Right. Well, great. Thank you for all that. So we've come to the end of the Q&A. So thank you, Barrie, for being here. It's always thought-provoking, and it's great to have you here. So thanks for being a part of the conference.
Okay.
And we'll look forward to, seeing you online, and we'll move on to our next speaker now, our grand finale here. So let's go ahead and transition to the next presentation. Yeah.
Thanks, Barrie. Yeah. Important topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barrie, for that wonderful presentation. Our next and our final speaker for today is going to be Virginia Bennett. Now, she is a clinical psychologist and a hypnotherapist, and she's also part of our wonderful Bay Area Seth community here in California. And she is going to present a very unique presentation. And you will see with the title, it is called Jane Roberts Died for Our Sinful Selves, a Resurrection. Now, if that doesn't raise some eyebrows, I don't know what will. I'm super looking forward to what she's got in store for us today. She spoke last year at our conference, also a very unique topic. She spoke on Seth and psychedelics. And so I am, and I know we are all super looking forward to what journey she is going to take us on today. And we will have a live Q&A here, so go ahead and type away those questions into the feed. I will pick the best ones, maybe throw in some of my own for good measure, and we're going to have a great time closing it out with that last and final Q&A with Virginia. So let's bring her onto our digital and our multidimensional stage with a very, very warm Sethian welcome.
Hi, I'm Virginia Bennett. I'm going to be talking with you in this presentation about a question that I've had going back to my reading the Seth material starting in the mid-1970s, and probably matches some of the questions many of you have had if you've also read the Seth material. The question arises, how is it that Jane Roberts, who was so creative in her own right, who had direct access to Seth, an entity that was no longer focused in physical reality, who brought through such a range of material, as well as specific guidance and information and advice to her and her husband, Robert Butts. Given all of that, how is it that she could have suffered with what we can only call torturous symptoms for over something like a 20-year period? Symptoms that matched those that her mother had, at least to some extent. Her mother, who was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, Although Seth maintained to the very end that Jane did not have that disease, and basically ascribed her physical symptoms, as both she and Rob and Seth referred to them, as being essentially psychosomatic. Now, we have to keep in mind that Seth, of course, viewed every disease basically as psychosomatic. But there's still this question of her continually getting the message through Seth that there was real choice in her symptoms, and that she had in some way brought them on herself, and she could undo them. She could stop them and really recover it at any point, even going right up to almost the very day of her death. So how do we make sense of this? And Seth referred to this aspect in her that seemed to be perpetuating the symptoms as her sinful self, among other aspects that seem to be involved. So this is what I'd like to plunge into today in my presentation. And without further ado, I think that's what I'll do right now. So let us begin. I am entitling my presentation, let me move my image over here a little bit, as Jane Roberts died for our sinful selves. I probably better explain this title to start with, because I'm sure that there are some of you out there kind of sitting with your hands on your hips going, this is a terrible title. How could I possibly be proposing the idea that Jane Roberts died for our sinful selves when that's the exact antithesis of Seth's message, which was that we create our own reality. We are responsible for our own experiences. And on top of that, not only did Jane Roberts not die for our sinful selves, but Jesus didn't die for our sinful selves, because Jesus didn't even die on the cross. In fact, it was some poor buzzard that was deceived into thinking he was Jesus, and it was a tough job, but somebody had to do it. So he got himself crucified in order to fulfill some kind of prophecy. So as far as we know, Jesus, who was only part of 3 different human personalities, probably ran off to India with Mary Magdalene, and they lived happily ever after. Okay, so where can this title possibly be coming from? Let me explain. The most important piece here is that I'm not supposing throughout this presentation that I have it figured out how Jane and why Jane died the way that she did. Her death is really none of my business, and I couldn't figure it out if I wanted to. So if we're talking about the living, breathing Jane Roberts, then she would be equally horrified by this title, I'm sure. I think she would be much more in line with the lyrics of singer and songwriter Patti Smith. Let me bring that up. When Patti Smith said, Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. My sins, my own, they belong to me. I think this would be more Jane's message. But here's the issue. As soon as we use a terminology like sinful, and that's not my language, and that wasn't Jane Roberts' language, that came from Seth. So once we're using a terminology like that, now we're into the whole arena of collective consciousness, of archetypes, of mythology. If the feminists are right that the personal is political, then we can also easily say that the personal is also collective, it's archetypal. We live out themes in our lives that have to do not just with our own personal lives and our own personal struggles, they also have to do with things that other people experience, things that humanity may be playing out. So right there, it starts to get bigger than who Jane was as a living human person. Again, let me kind of move my presence over here a little bit. This is what I would like us to think about throughout this presentation, to view Jane Roberts more as a dramatist. She's a playwright. And she has come up with a particular play, a particular drama, and a particular version of that story, of that drama, which is being played out in such a way that she is the playwright, she's the director, she's the actress in this play. And this play is being shown on a worldwide stage, which is true for Jane Roberts. As much as she wanted to be a private person living in Elmira, New York, she really was a public figure. And before she died, her books were all over the world. They have been translated into many languages, which means that the way that she lived out her life also became part of that play, part of that drama that was being enacted, that other people would be viewing and experiencing, if only vicariously, not only at the time of her death, but also afterwards. So we in the future are also looking at this. In that way, then, we can look at this drama more from the standpoint of what is the character that the dramatist has presented? What are the themes that are coming through this particular play and this particular version of the play? As we know, the playwright has the option, in this case, to come up with a happy ending. Playwright could have come up with something where the heroine is able to overcome her symptoms or never has those symptoms, and she lives a wonderful life with her husband, and they both die in their sleep at 95, having partaken of the great wisdom and advice and guidance of Seth. It could have gone that way. But the dramatist decided to leave us with a sad ending, a not so happy ending, a bit of a tragedy in a certain way. So this dramatist wanted the audience to be leaving the theater perhaps being more self-reflective and asking questions rather than taking it, quote, on faith, that if you just follow the guidance or what have you, that all will be well. One of the reasons I'm doing this presentation is because of a dream that I had a number of years ago in which I saw Jane Roberts. It was really kind of like her head. It was a bit of a cartoon or an animated image. And as I was watching that, I was thinking about how Jane could have overcome her symptoms and in effect had a kind of miraculous healing and returned to us as if she was the miracle worker, the ideal, the one who was able to overcome her physical affliction and basically express herself in a way that would be in alignment with her inner self. And I no sooner had that thought going through my mind that I instantly heard Jane's voice saying, and that's why I didn't do it, which totally caught me by surprise. And I think it really left me with this thought of, oh, so she could have, but she decided not to go that way. So this is what we're going to be exploring a bit more. Here we have the origin of the sinful self, okay? Adam and Eve taking the apple from the tree of good and evil. And right here, we have this archetypal theme of exactly that, of being cast out of the garden of evil, of having an awareness of good and evil, of having choice, of having a duality between what Seth referred to as the sinful self in contrast to what? The non-sinful self, the happy self, the good self. So right here we have a very evocative theme that is being played out in this character that we know as Jane Roberts. Seth said, in a manner of speaking, the sinful self created the superhuman self-image that demanded so much, and it encased Rupert's body as if in concrete. This is a very interesting and important point that's being made here. We can't really have a sinful self unless we have some kind of super self, or what Freud referred to as the superego. You can't consider yourself sinful unless you have some yardstick, some way of measuring yourself, that you're sinful compared to some other way you're supposed to be. And that's one reason why I think in order to understand the sinful self, we really have to understand the superhuman self, or what Seth referred to as the super self. So it's the super self that I would say is a bit more of the real actor on the stage in terms of influencing what happened with Jane and with Rob as well. So let's look at what Seth had to say about their super self. Seth said, Rupert believes that he should be a TV personality, a healer, a writer, an excellent psychic, versed in all of the most esoteric traditions, a magnetic personality. He believes he should be objectively intellectual, cool and calm, and spontaneous at the same time. He should be in glowing health, glowing, Seth underlined it, and shine amid the multitude, a rather impossible task that would make any individual feel quite inferior by contrast. So Jane's super self was super indeed. This was an impossible to realize self that was in effect sitting there in judgment about all the ways she wasn't living up to this higher standard. And then we see for Rob, he's speaking to Rob now, you expect yourself to be a great artist, lost in the intricacies of what you think of as an artistic emotional reality, innocent of any interfering intellectuality. You berate yourself on the one hand for an intellect that seems to separate you from the immediate emotional contact with painting with others. At the same time, of course, you would certainly berate a Van Gogh for his overly emotional behavior. This is what's so important about the super self, because we often think of it as being this unfair critic or judge of what we do, and it is that. But as Freud indicated, as he pointed out with the superego, this is also the part of ourself that carries the ideal. This is what we may have even come in with as an idea of value fulfillment, but this perfect realization of that value fulfillment of who we ultimately would like to become. Now, if that's used as a guide, all right. But if that's actually a standard by which we then are trying to whip ourselves into achieving, that becomes actually dangerous. But it also is one of the reasons why it's so hard for us to relinquish this. It's so difficult to let go of the critic because the critic is holding the ideal. And if we let the critic go, there's a deep fear that then we've given up all hope of achieving that ideal. In 1972, Jane and Rob finally went on a vacation to Florida. And when they went on this vacation, Jane's physical symptoms really acted up. This was one of the early times when they became quite pronounced. And so Jane contacted or began to express an aspect of herself that identified as the creator. And this is what it had to say. I won't read the entire thing, but it was conveying the message that it was the creative drives for both of them, for both Jane and Rob, and saying that its belief was that you both of them needed to write and paint a reasonable amount of each time. The creator made it clear that it was really pretty pissed off that they were on vacation. They weren't doing anything. They had been about to start a new Seth book, but they decided to go on vacation before they began that book. And the creator was not happy with that decision and the fact that Jane wasn't doing any work and Rob wasn't doing much. And over a period of time, the creator said to Rob, you began to change your ideas. I expected them to be unswerving. When it seemed you would not police the two of you with the intense fervor necessary, I began to do so and took upon myself all those attitudes that had been yours. Now, one way to understand this, and Seth had explained this to both of them actually through Rob and talking to Rob, that Jane's symptoms had developed because she felt bad that Rob was still working at that point. He had a part-time job at Artistic Designs. And I think initially Seth Speaks had been published at that point. They didn't have a lot of money, but it was clear something was happening. And Jane was all in with that. She was like, I'm done with the day job. And she really wanted Rob to be done with the day job too. Rob would kind of be making these snarky comments to her like, well, you don't have to punch a clock, and well, if anybody's going to have a job here, it's going to be me. And her attitude was like, just quit your job, it's going to work out. Seth says it's going to be okay, we'll make it work. But she also wasn't really fully able to express that. So one of the things that she did, not on a fully conscious level, but she began to develop these symptoms that in effect would kind of chain her to her desk, thinking that would be reassuring Rob that she wasn't going to just be screwing around or be too spontaneous or be socializing, or she was trying to convey that, no, I mean business, I really will be working and producing, you can quit your job. Rob was completely kind of gobsmacked when Seth conveyed this to him. He didn't understand that that's what Jane had been doing at all. And this is where the creator is also saying here to Rob, now you spend half your time trying to figure them, meaning Jane's symptoms, out, and what is wrong with Rupert, a time you should be working. And so, and then to jump to the lower portion, the creator is saying, I want the main energizing portion of you directed into your work, both of you. Now they have been directed towards Rupert's condition. The condition will vanish automatically if these ends are met. They are side effects. And this message, I think, continued, frankly, for the next 20 years, that there was this idea that if they kind of would really put their all into these creative endeavors and not worry about Jane's symptoms, theoretically everything would be well. But of course, good luck with that, because they're living in the real physical world and it's not always so easy to be ignoring those symptoms. But we do get a sense of this super self that's at play here with the creator. I abhor hobbyists. I accept no substitutes. And in that respect, I am like a jealous God. I am the taskmaster. And it also indicates I'm like a computer gone amok if my methods do not meet my ends. So it's also part of Jane that was feeling like it's not working. You know, I'm trying to use these symptoms, but it's not getting Rob to quit his job and do his painting and have Jane do her creative work. So on some level, this part wasn't sure what to do either. Now, around the same time, actually the same vacation, just a few days from it, Jane kind of gave some part of herself the freedom to convey what its attitudes were towards her physical body. Again, I won't read the entire thing, but we really get a flavor of this. So definitely a part of her that could say that it, meaning the body, in youth, it could grind the soul to a pulp if left free and follow its natural desires. This was a very raw version. All these mistakes are things that Jane made as she was typing on their typewriter. But anyway, or writing it by hand. If left free to follow its natural desires, it will become gross and fat and flabby and gluttonous and betray the self into death by giving birth or destroying the fine tuning of the mind that can become sunken in mires of flesh. And then there's references to the mother's body was also gluttonous, bad heritage from mother and father, too sexy. And then it's saying, I was always willing to sacrifice everything, meaning this part, anything is willing to go. No sacrifice is too much. Yes, I will force the body to be chained to the desk if that's what it takes to get things produced. And it says, I'm not convinced you can police yourself consciously enough, so I'm going to cut down the range of temptation. So her relationship with her body was, shall we say, ambivalent at best, and at worst, again, quite a taskmaster, quite a destructive force, at least on this level. So this was one of the things, again, that Jane was grappling with. There's a lot of psychological implications with this. And clearly Jane's relationship with her mother, who was, shall we say, extremely emotionally dysregulated, presumably at Jane's birth, a lot of attachment issue problems. Her mother faked suicide, a lot of kind of horror stories. Jane was basically abandoned to an orphanage when her mother had to be hospitalized at a very young age that Jane was in the orphanage. So we get the flavor here that when somebody is not able to get the kind of secure attachment, connection, love with the mother, with the father and the parents, then we're going to end up in getting some definite difficulties, emotional, psychological difficulties that can play out physically as well. It's pretty easy then to see how someone, given Jane's history, given this disturbance of connection with a mother who had problems with her body also, how one would come up with these convictions that one is imperfect, that one is unworthy, that there's guilt, punishment. Rob had this as well, but the indications, and Seth had said this, his upbringing was more stable. There probably was more love. There was a clearer connection with the mother. I think his issues sort of came when he was a little bit older. Still issues of perfection, however, and worthiness and having to prove yourself. And I have no doubt that there was guilt and punishment in there as well. But it didn't play out the same way that it did with Jane. But I think, as we'll see, his control, the way that I think Rob was wrapped pretty tightly himself, also became part of the configuration of what happened with Jane. But I used this image with the diamond, the star, the light of the inner self, of the true essence that never goes away. That is, it brings the person into life, that it enables the person to achieve value fulfillment. That's always there. But when it has become essentially encased in these other beliefs, these other qualities, then it can be eclipsed essentially, and it can play out physically. And these four qualities are things that Seth specifically identified as being the qualities that lead people to develop physical illness. So again, we can see, given imperfection, unworthiness, these other qualities, guilt, punishment, why the child really would develop at an early age a sense of the super self, the parentification of the child. Somehow I'm going to prove myself and be good enough. And in that way, I will be able to receive the love that I need and be able to receive the validation that I am good enough. Only, as we can see, you can't really get there from here if the here is that sense of unworthiness and being imperfect. But the hope stays alive, which is one reason why any of us may be quite reluctant to ease up on the super self if we think it will cause us to go back into that experience of the super self. It kind of keeps us, going back to that sense of the sinful self. It kind of keeps us, at least in our own mind, keeps our head above water. This then is the kind of turmoil that can happen, and that I think in many ways Jane was experiencing in particular, this inner turmoil, this inner resistance and rebellion that can happen when a child experiences that domination from a parent, a kind of crushing the child's will, a not being recognized, not being loved for who she is. And sometimes the last bastion of that authentic self seems to be a feeling of rebellion, an ability to say no, not overtly usually, because as a child, that would not have brought good results for Jane on the part of her mother. So it has to be expressed either in kind of passive ways or indirect ways. And from the outset, this can look a little confusing. This is where we can see how some people in this resistance and rebelliousness actually end up rebelling or resisting the very things that actually would be helpful for them. There's a kind of self-sabotage that can happen to it, a kind of cutting one's nose off to spite oneself, as it were. It it is something that is inexplicable on a logical level unless you understand it's the resistance itself, it's the struggle itself that keeps some kind of hope alive that something of the person can remain the same. Something of the person can remain authentic. And so this is what happened. This is what it can look like on the outside, that we don't have Jane screaming and yelling and ranting and raving and being more like her mother was, right? I mean, she would have a horror of doing that. Maybe she would have been better off if she had. But it does show up in ways that she would be resistant and rebellious. And her smoking, I think, is an example of that. Early on, Seth had come through and said, well, Rupert, AKA Jane, probably would be a lot healthier if she wouldn't smoke. But then he had to also admit that she wasn't going to die from lung cancer. And he kept kind of giving these hopeful suggestions and predictions of, oh, Rupert's going to stop smoking soon. And yes, he's really building up to it in the next few days, you know, or soon. He's going to just give it up. He won't really need it anymore. Well, Jane kept smoking, okay? And then Seth continues with a few suggestions and then eventually gives up. And Jane, as far as I can tell, she was smoking probably up to the last week or so of her death. She was smoking still in the hospital. So I would suggest this is a big FU to Seth and to Rob and to some part of herself that was determined to prove to herself she wasn't going to follow anybody's rules. And even if it did cost her in some ways, it was more important that she could maintain a sense of herself that would not be compromised by the thou shalt and thou shalt not. An important statement that she needed to prove. Stepping back a little bit as we watch this on a stage and see this drama play out, I think we are also getting an example for ourselves of, can the ego, in fact, override messages from the inner self, override what might even be in its own best interest? You bet it can, at least up to a point. We do have that freedom. It is our choice. And sometimes we need to prove that to ourselves. I think in some ways Jane needed to. Okay, so this is kind of on the personal psychological level. Now I've already pushed it in terms of being perhaps sacrilegious. So I thought, well, let's just take it all the way. This is Jane's natal horoscope. And lest you think I'm committing a sin here by bringing in her horoscope, I did want to include this quote from Seth, that where he says astrology has its merits and many good ones, and excellent astrologists can help people to better understand themselves. They can understand what they chose before their life, what they were coming into. This is a kind of blueprint. Now, he was completely against our looking to the stars to tell us what to do or giving our authority away to the stars or to an astrologer or anybody else. But as a blueprint, as a kind of mirror that one can use as a language, as a symbolic system that can reflect what we might have brought in with us, it can be quite useful. And I think it can be a little fun looking at this and saying, well, what showed up in Jane's natal chart? I am not an excellent astrologer. I'm not by any means any kind of expert. I'm a rank amateur, but there are a few things that I think are really worth noting. So she has her sun and her moon. This is like her basic essence, her inner self in this lifetime, and her rising sign, which is her view of the world and how the world initially views her. All are in earth signs. So she was built like a brick house. She came in here with a design to be grounded. Okay, so she was going to be running some pretty high energy, but she built herself to hold that, to be able to bring that energy to the earth element, to the physical element. And she even has Saturn on her ascendant. And let's kind of look at what that means. Just taking off the internet, and I will move this out of the way. So Saturn conjunct the ascendant on a natal chart, the theme here is responsibility, the main keyword for this aspect. You feel responsible for your family, others, you feel responsible for problems that are not your fault. You have many responsibilities placed on you from an early age, which is certainly true with her mother. You feel it is your duty to be the serious one and do the hard work. You certainly have a strong work ethic, but there is such a thing as being too responsible. Are we hearing something like the overly conscientious self here? I think so. And so you already worry enough about your own problems, so it's important not to worry about other people's issues. Well, easier said than done. You have to deal with many delays, restrictions, sense of the universe holding you back. It's as if her very physical body was holding her back. Constriction of muscles, swollen joints, ways that her body would not do her bidding, literally, physically being held back. And it says you can become hesitant, too scared to be proactive or daring to take risks. Now, Jane took many risks in her life and was very proactive, obviously, but there was this other very cautious side to herself. And again, the idea is that she came in to play with these elements, to struggle and be challenged by these elements. It's part of the original design by the incipient playwright. So in having Saturn, it's right on the cusp, but technically in the 12th house, which is it's often the house of mystery, the house of the unconscious. It's what we're not fully aware of, but it carries a lot of weight, especially when you've got Saturn there. So she came in again with a theme and intention for hard work and learnedness in the area of spirituality and metaphysics. So she was definitely going in that direction, but then also having these challenges of hardships related to captivity, bondage, self-denial. People with this placement may have to grapple with subconscious desires and neuroses that are self-sabotaging. So again, to reflect, this isn't just about what happened with her mother or only about what happened with Rob, although I will just as an aside say that in my perusal of the the personal sessions, there is a lot about Jane and Rob and their relationship, their current relationship, that has to do with Jane's symptoms, ways that she was taking on and playing out issues that they both had. And actually a lot more about that than Jane's relationship with her mother. But that's not to discount it in any way. It's just to recognize there were a lot of things in play. And then part of this was her coming in, though, to deal with issues of self-sabotage, which might have been having to do with other lifetimes. But a fear of losing control, responsibility to humanity. And I think we have to have the perspective here. They're getting mail from people all over the world, begging for help, and sometimes wanting Jane to have a session or psychically have her find a lost child or give them guidance. They're going to have a knock on their door, and it could be anybody on the other side of the door. It could be some Mooney that just dropped in from India, or came cross country, or could be a physicist, could be a famous writer. I mean, sometimes people were nice enough to call ahead of time, but a lot of times people just showed up. So the world was coming to them, and her sense of responsibility was very real. She expressed a fear that the Seth material might be used in some way to create a religious cult. Now, knowing what we know now, I'd say good luck with that. I mean, that's trying to get Seth folks together is a little bit like trying to herd cats. So I don't think it lends itself well to that. But Jane wouldn't know that at the time. And that was one of her concerns, was not to lead people astray. So an interest in transcendent wisdom, a desire to teach and enlighten others, and a deep, strong faith in her core, although that got challenged, as faith will. Okay, so now we're going to kind of leave the personality, the current personality of Jane and Rob, and see what showed up in terms of other lifetimes. Seth identified, and Jane and Rob recognized another lifetime, a past life of Rob that was called Nabeen. And Nabin had been a scholar in Constantinople many hundred years ago. And he was, talk about a taskmaster, he was involved, among other things, in translating, I believe, an ancient language. And it was very meticulous, detailed work. And it was the kind of thing that even a minor error or mistake could have major consequences in terms of understanding the language. So he was, talk about someone who was overly conscientious. I think this was Nabin. This is not a man who had a great sense of humor, let's put it that way, or it was going to lighten up and, you know, y'all could have a beer with him after work. So he was quite that individual. Well, he encounters Jane in another lifetime. I mean, this is a current life with Nabin, but another lifetime of hers. And this is Sharbina. So Sharbina was identified as being a prostitute priestess. Now, in a temple and following a certain religious cult, I have some problems with that term because it's not going to translate very well into our current culture. There obviously, at least many of you may be aware, there were ancient religious cults and practices that expressed and embraced the sacredness of sexuality and sensuality, and especially in the way that was expressed through the feminine. And so Sharbina was evidently part of that kind of religious group, and a religious group that very much followed their own rules and their own guidelines, and were not going to be adhering to whatever the traditional beliefs and customs were for women who would have been socially involved at the time. So she was quite the opposite of where Nabin was coming from, and hence something of a fatal attraction between the two of them that went on for like a 10-year period. And they became extremely involved sexually and in other ways. And Nabin was essentially horrified by Sharbina, but also couldn't stay away from her. So he was ashamed to be with her, but couldn't stay away from her. And it sounds like Sharbina kind of loved blowing his mind. And there was an incident where she kind of showed up at one of his classes. He was teaching his students, and she kind of waltzes in and full decor, and everything stops as she's creating true chaos in his classroom. So this was a dynamic they were both grappling with. And there were times that Jane could certainly see, even other people in the ESP session could see Nabin, could see that authoritarian quality that would come through Rob, and that very serious, this is where we see that police part, that taskmaster that some part of Jane was attracted to and did look to kind of keep them both on track. But Rob, I think, was learning how to loosen up a little bit, and that created some other problems. And then Jane, for her part, felt the existence of Sharbina and was afraid that she was going to kind of get loose in this life and then create havoc in both of their lives and interrupt Rob in his painting endeavors and what was happening. So she didn't really trust the spontaneous part of herself and even the sexual, sensual part of herself fully, because it was too close, I think, to the sense of Sharbina. And as we can see, Jane's beliefs about her body, and of course, things that her sinful self would have gained from the Catholic Church, where the original sin is going to go back to the body. It's going to go back to sexuality and sensuality. So yeah, there would be a conflict here, which again is part of the drama. It's one of the themes that needs to be worked with. Okay. I'm going to shift gears here for a minute. Let's get back to Seth. Now, Seth said, so throughout the book, I will use you with a capital to designate your larger identity, for it is from that identity that you form the reality that you know. Notice the brackets around this. This is actually, it comes to us through SETHresearchproject.com. Thank you very much, Mary Dillman and Deb. You can look it up yourself. Mary Dillman had looked at Rob's original notes written in his personal shorthand, and she has indicated places where his notes are different than what actually showed up in the published books. And this is one of the sentences, one of the parts that did not show up in the book. So you see in brackets what Seth actually dictated, and then in these brackets you see what was actually put in the book. I would say this was a major thing that got lost in translation. And we don't know if the editing came from Rob or came from the publishers, but I'd like you to stop and think about this for a moment. If you had read the Seth material, Seth Speaks, Major Personal Reality, if you had read the Seth material in general, and it had continually been indicated when Seth was talking about this greater you, part of the greater inner self, and differentiated from the smaller you, the egoic, the outer ego self, just the identity, this Virginia, this Joe, or whoever you are, what's on your driver's license card. If you were continually being shown when Seth was talking about one and when Seth was talking about the other, I would suggest it might have prevented an ongoing confusion that we easily could have gotten caught in anyway, but it makes it easier to get caught in this, in what you are we talking about. For example, let's look at this. Seth says, you make your own reality. We're familiar with this, right? There is no other rule. Knowing this is the secret of creativity. Now I put in this capital Y here, but let's see how this reads. I have spoken of you, capital Y, yet this must not be confused with the you that you often think you are, the ego alone, for the ego is only a portion of you, capital Y. The ego is a portion of you that arises to deal directly with the life that the larger you is living. This is no small thing to understand this. And Seth is trying to convey this. And I would say, if we can get this, if we can really understand this, that the level we're operating on is absolutely crucial. Because if the egoic you, just this outer ego part of us that's trying to keep us swimming in the physical waters and doing the best it can and has very limited understanding, it's got access to more, but it's got very limited understanding. And then, like Jane, we're being told that the illness, let's just stay with health, the illness that we're experiencing, we've created it, we made it happen, and only we can change it. It's very hard not to take that in like, oh, it's my fault. I get it. I'm to blame for it. And I have no idea how to handle it or how to change it. So even by not changing it, then that means I'm a failure on top of being in pain and discomfort and being ill. So now we've just taken a situation that was already bad, and now we feel even worse. And I frankly think this happened a lot with Jane. That so she's hearing from Seth, no, you created this, you can give it up. And she's like, how? And she's hearing this from Rob. And Rob also is saying, you're creating it, honey, can't you just knock it off, right? You're torturing me as well as yourself. And she's saying that to herself. I think this kind of got to be this dog chasing its tail on an egoic level. Now, of course, the intention was Seth was trying to kind of raise up our sense of self, right? He's trying to help us move out of the ego and be aware that there's a much greater sense of ourself, so that our poor ego can kind of relax and take it easy, right? And go, oh, okay, I am really innocent or ignorant, and it's okay. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have access to this higher self. I'm sure this is his intention. But when you get into that super self and the ego trying to figure it out and not being able to figure it out and being afraid to let go, then it really can become a snowball that becomes increasingly oppressive. And one of the things that I will mention, because I see this throughout the personal sessions, that Seth is continually trying to explain to them what they're doing and why they're doing it. Well, again, the intention is a good one, that if he can give them the insight, then they can kind of go, oh, I get it, I understand, and they can stop doing it or do something better. But again, if that is coming in through the egoic mind, then all it's getting is, in a sense, a dogmatized version of that, of all I get is what I'm doing is wrong and I should be doing something else. And at one point, Jane in the hospital broke down that way. Rob was pointing out, well, you're not doing any reading. We set up the special platform for you because she physically couldn't hold the book. And we got you those eyeglasses so you could see the material. And, you're not reading, and she just breaks out in tears. She says, yeah, I get it. Everything I'm doing is wrong. I'm a failure. I mean, it's tragic. It's pathetic to be in that kind of position. So, okay, this then goes to, all right, so wait, so what could help here, or how do we understand this? This is one thing, I just use this picture as a way of illustrating a greater self, a bigger self. Now, perhaps we're trying to build this scaffolding to make contact with that self, or we have a cord coming from our inner self or higher self to reach the ego, to bring in more resources. Fair enough, we want to establish this relationship, but this does involve, in a sense, forgiving ourselves for being so imperfect, or allowing or accepting on an egoic level that we're not going to live up to that super self ideal. We're not going to be able to do that, and it's okay. All right, because without that, we're left with this kind of experience where Seth said the ego can feel cut off, lonely, and frightened, however, if the conscious mind lets the ego run away with it. And I think this picture really illustrates maybe some of how Jane felt, being cut off, feeling alone, not having access to that inner self. But it's an important distinction that the conscious self is not the egoic self. This is one reason why mindfulness works and meditation works. And John Kabat-Zinn brought mindfulness to people who had chronic, essentially incurable, quote unquote, pain that nothing else worked for. Because if we can bring consciousness and a gentle awareness to whatever's happening, a feeling of emotional pain or physical pain, if we can allow consciousness and awareness to be present and not run from it and not be afraid of it and not tell ourselves it's never going to get better or we should do something, if we can just be still, then the waters will gradually clear, okay? The sediment will drop to the bottom of the pond. And in that clarity, we will be able to sense this greater self. There is something to meet us that's holding us. This is what Seth was pointing to. He brought in this, and this is a long quote, so I won't go into all of this. But Seth was referring to Christ's consciousness and Christ's teaching of a childlike belief and the importance of that, because it points to the idea of that there is a source, a parent of the self, who by nature is free from the self's ignorance or lack of understanding. And by self, he means this egoic self and the ignorance, the lack of understanding at a given time. And that there is something higher, bigger, that does know better, that can bring in some kind of guidance, that can help us, and that will help fulfill our hopes and dreams and potentials. When we let go of this super self, we don't have to let go of our dreams or our hopes or our potentials. We'll actually be in a better position to have this greater self there to guide us and to help us, even on a day-to-day basis. So this is where Seth is saying Jesus's phrase of "thy will be done" is actually a very useful psychological framework of turning something over, of saying, yeah, I can't handle it. This egoic self, I don't have the answer. So I'll turn it over, thy will be done. Turn it over to something bigger. Current psychology recommends that people go into nature or something where they can experience a sense of awe. We all need a sense of something being bigger than who we think we are. And there can be great comfort in that. Beauty gives us that. Nature gives us that. Animals can give us that we don't have to figure it all out with our waking mind, that this full potential exists within us. There's an innate goodness, not a good as compared to evil or bad, an innate goodness. Seth said in A Way Towards Health, to let go is to trust the spontaneity of your own being, to trust your own energy and power and strength, to abandon yourself to the energy of your own life. And I think sometimes this language scares us, but it's important to know you can wade in through the shallow end of the pool. You don't have to dive in on the deep end. You can put a toe in the water and pull it out. And I think, again, this is what Jane was learning. On certain levels is how to hold on, how to let go. Something that we all are practicing in a variety of ways. And creativity, any form of creativity, is a form of letting go. And we have only to recognize we're creating all the time, every second, every breath, we're creating. So these were some of the, not the very last words to Jane, but really getting to the end, where he was reassuring Jane that you're supported, and reassuring all of us, never abandoned, couched lovingly in the great yet intimate presence of all that is, that love forms your breath, your life, your death, as in which the unknown divinity is always blessed and ever known. It is known and unknown, forming all stages of creativity, and you are held within it, graced to be a part of the divine framework of all that is. And so knowing that, then it just becomes almost more a matter of play and experimenting and exploring and just noticing what are those ways that creativity comes in? What are those ways that we can have a more direct sense of something bigger than ourselves? And we're going to know that because our body will relax a little bit. When we stop trying to figure things out, when we just breathe. John Kabat-Zinn would say, as long as you're breathing, more is right with you than wrong with you. So if nothing else, just slow down enough and breathe, because it's the breath that all of this is coming through. It's nourishing you. And so this cultivating that relationship and noticing when we're getting too cut off, too caught in the ego, it doesn't have to be a big jump, just to slow down, just to breathe. It's always there. It's always with us. So with this, we're going to let Jane move through her own death process, her own ultimate letting go, as we all will, moving into what it will be for her and was for her next experience. Okay. And we can now return to the theater. The play has come to an end. The dramatist has shown us the ending that she showed. And this is the resurrection. This is where the actors come out and they take the bow and the curtain comes down and we get to go backstage and we see Jane. I actually recently had an image of her that just popped up in my mind, and she was just radiant, and she had short black hair and kind of larger than life. And it's like she's holding a bouquet of flowers and all kinds of people around her. And it's a performance well done, master at her craft, getting ready, I'm sure, for yet another performance to be held, another play to be designed. So it's in this sense that we meet her in her point of resurrection and our own, because we can take from the play whatever we would like from that character who, quote, died for our sins, who played out perhaps our worst fantasy or our struggle of, can we maintain that egoic control? And what does that look like? And what's it look like if we try to manage it ourselves, or can we let in that which is larger than us? And how do we find and maintain our own direct link to all that is? All of that drama, the Sturm und Drang that was played out on that stage, we get to take that with us to whatever extent that is useful. And now it becomes part of our play, part of our drama, part of what we are becoming. So with that, I will leave you with one of Seth's final sayings, that if it isn't fun, why are you doing it? So thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to what promises to be a very interesting Q&A time, in which I hope you will share some of your own thoughts and your own ideas about how you've made sense of this drama that the playwright Jane Roberts has presented us with. Talk with you then. Bye-bye. You're muted.
There we go. I had to make at least one mistake throughout the conference, right?
Yeah.
Classic Zoom mistake. You don't unmute yourself. So here we are, and we are live with Virginia. Now, instead of being the co-host, she's going to be the interviewee. And we have a lot of questions that came in through from the chat, as well as personal questions of my own. But I want to get in, first of all, is there anything you'd like to add now, having reflected on your talk? Is there anything you'd like to add to your presentation, or any updates? Or
Yeah, thanks, Tom. One thing I'd like to, in case people haven't seen it, I'd like to refer people to go to the Seth Research Project and make sure they watch the video of Jane Roberts and Seth coming through her at an ESP session that was 1972. And if you have seen it, but not recently, I'd say watch it again, because that's where you can really see the sheer vitality of Seth and what happens to Jane's body, and how direct he is, and just the power that comes through his eyes, and the freedom of her movement, and the way that she is relating, or she is relating. And I think then you get to see Seth leave Jane's body, in effect, and like Jane kind of goes into what I would call her, like her Clark Kent persona, and the glasses go on, and she kind of almost physically becomes smaller and just a little shyer, a little bit more in retreat. And I think that speaks to some of how Jane and Rob, to some extent, she had a tiger by the tail in having contact with Seth, and to contemplate, because this wasn't just Seth's energy, right? He's using her vitality and her energy. And the prospect of having that proximity to that kind of energy and being able to really let that come through your life it's an interesting thing to try to contemplate on how difficult that would be in so many respects. So at any rate, I think that's a nice way to, again, kind of think about what are these different levels like, what were these different aspects like, and how some components of our personality do get in our own way. But that's also the human experience. That's the human character that we live out. So I'd make reference to that for people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember during one of the in-person conferences we had, when Lawrence was still alive, we played that video, or one of the videos of her channeling.
Right.
And then Lawrence would explain like how the energy of the room would just completely shift. And he uses a very specific word that he says he used deliberately. It felt like an alien presence was in the room.
Yeah. Lawrence would say when Seth came through, Jane was not in the building. And another thing that he said, because it was Mary Dillman that first showed that video at the Seth Conference a number of years ago. And Lawrence looked at that in amazement, that video. He said, I never saw that, Jane. Like by the time the New York boys were there, she was already kind of more constricted, wearing the muumuu, kind of not moving when Seth came through. And of course, there was this problem with their neighbors in the apartment building. And from the very beginning, there'd be this loud, booming voice, and Rob and then Jane, they're kind of like, oh, can you tone it down a little bit, Seth? We don't want to get thrown out of the apartment building. Right. So again, that dynamic tension of how do you bring that kind of energy essence through? It's an interesting thing to contemplate.
Yeah. So great. And yeah, a lot of these books, we read the words. And so it's good to remind ourselves of like, what's really happening here and what did that feel like to be there? So thank you for that.
I got one other thing that I didn't kind of fit in. I want to let people know, if they've never heard of this before, that the original translation of sin actually means missing the mark.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if folks haven't heard about that, that's a nice way to think about it. We miss the mark. You get another chance. You do what you can.
It's actually an archery term, I believe, where to repent means to go towards making the mark. Right. So it's interesting, right? Hitting the target is like this is right.
And you're totally plugged in, but
right.
You get to get it, but you don't always get to keep it. So.
There's that too. So, all this talk about the, being harsh on ourselves, comparing ourselves to the super self. It reminds me of the quote that Richard Gentle brought in earlier, to be gentle with your own spirit and not a disciplinarian, right? That really stuck with me.
Yeah.
So, and I loved your play between the super self and this ideal self, right? It's like the former being something that we're constantly measuring ourselves up to, and then we beat ourselves up for not being good enough, right? Versus this whole idea of, that other version is like we see this idealized self, but it's something that we're inspired towards. It's something that we grow towards, like a flower growing towards the sun. And these two distinctions of like, I'm inspired by my quote unquote future self or, more advanced self, if you will, versus like I'm measuring myself up. I'm not good enough yet. Oh, let me hit myself harder because I'm not there yet. Right. That's
The beatings will continue until morale improves. Right.
Exactly.
But like you said, if you can take it more as it's a guide, and it really can be gentle. So often the harshness is what we learn from models and people we have as when we're children, but it doesn't have to continue in that vein at all.
And I remember a quote Seth once said, it is very much like when we can use the quote unquote future self almost as if the flower would be reaching back in time and inspiring the bulb to realize, look at what you can become. You're just a bulb now, but you can become this beautiful flower, You
can use that very literally. It's actually a hypnotic technique, but you don't have to be hypnotized to do it. I mean, you can really tune into the future self that's already passed that test or already made that difficult phone call or whatever, and let it be a guide because it already did it. So it knows how you got there. So use that.
It's already done. Yeah. And, just to make that distinction, huge distinction versus like, I have this idealized version of me and let me just beat myself up because I haven't measured up yet, right? It's like, it's so counterproductive and it's so prevalent in our culture at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. So we have a question here from Yoki. She says, I don't understand what Jane meant by the creator. Was she referring to a personal creator part or the creator in capital letters?
Yeah, I appreciate that question to clarify that. So that quote and what that came from was essentially Jane kind of, I think, being a little bit entranced and bringing through this aspect. She and Rob were kind of working on where did those symptoms come from. There was a lot of work they did, and what are your symptoms doing, or what are they trying to convey, or how to have different kind of parts of herself talk. And so this part came through, and it labeled itself the creator. So no, it's not the greater creator at all. I would say it really is this aspect of this kind of super self that's saying, I'm the one that creates and I'm going to be the taskmaster and having that harsher edge, even though, again, the intention is really good. The intention is to protect not just Jane's, but protect Rob's creativity. So it's its intention was good, but its methods were a bit too severe. So that's the term came from this part of Jane.
Right. Kind of reminds me a little bit of internal family systems as a modern psychological method. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm very big proponent on parts work, on talking to the different aspects. I refer to living life by committee. It's really good to kind of get everybody around the table and say, this is what I want to do. Anybody got some problems with it, or who's holding up the change? And again, to play with it, to see what shows up. You can usually sense it in your body, when you're saying, I really want to do this, but there's some kind of resistance or something's holding back, or there's a hesitancy, and then see what it's about.
I almost feel like, in spiritual practices, we sometimes talk about microcosms within microcosms within microcosms. And it's like you have this oversoul level or entity level, as Seth would say, with multiple lives, but then we have these personalities with multiple parts, right? And it's just like working the parts together at this level is almost like quote unquote oversoul training, at another level, right?
Yes. I think that's really right. And so often these parts, who knows? I mean, it's like Nabeen and Sharbina. I mean, these really may be what we consider to be sort of these little psychological aspects. That may be just kind of the tip of the iceberg of something that really is living in another time and place. But that can work to our benefit, of we don't have to do it all ourselves. And there is some other aspect that has some really good ideas and energy to give us.
I kind of feel like the more conscious we get within the personality itself, even the more we're going to start realizing that there's other aspects bleeding in, coming in.
Right. And I think when people start to get that, and I know this is true for myself, when we really start to get that, the ego does relax. Like once it really gets it, we're not trying to get rid of it. It doesn't have to figure it out all by itself. Then it does. And the body relaxes, things start to work better. We start to trust those intuitions, the things that begin to show up, trusting our promptings.
Yeah, that's one of those core beliefs that I've definitely discovered in myself and a lot of people is we get trained into this idea of like, the physical mind has to figure everything out.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, it's not designed for that. So of course we're going to be stressed because we can't see around the corner at this level. Right. And so it's like we're set up for just being called instead of like reaching up. Like I love that picture of with the scaffolding up to the Middle Eastern and Islamic the dome. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like building that scaffolding from the ego to the higher mind so that we can actually realize that, hey, wait, there's all these levels of consciousness we can tap into. We don't have to figure it all out at a physical level, right?
And then to know what level we're at or what's going on. So if we are overwhelmed, if we are stressed out or we're feeling anxious, then even if you can't change that right away, to just bring in that idea of like, okay, so this is not the state of mind to figure out the meaning of my life.
Right.
This is not a problem-solving state of mind. I always like to say, this is a state of mind where you go to that little junk drawer where you've got all kinds of things and sort those things out. Like do something physically that you don't have to think about and then gradually calm down.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So let's see if we can pull up another question here. Another one from Yoki, Jane's super self idea. Didn't Seth say that it also had to do with the former lives where she was a warrior leader with enormous consequences, right? That dovetails into what we've been talking about with the aspects.
Yeah, and that may very well be. There were other lifetimes. There was one where she and Rob had been brothers in Istanbul, I think in Turkey, and there was kind of dynamics between them. And it's also, and then sometimes other lifetimes were mentioned. But it's interesting that Seth on more than one occasion would say, well, there is more past life information about Jane, about Rob, what's going on, but Jane won't let me come through with it. And so there seemed to be something going on that Jane as a personality and was like, no, Seth, you can talk about Nabeen a little bit and but that's it. And I think that's something interesting to speculate about, perhaps.
I remember she wrestled with this whole idea of like, oh, we're going to go into past lives. Oh, I just don't want this to be a new age thing. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? She really resisted that.
Yeah, she was afraid of how people would receive it, and perhaps for good reason. I mean, given the time period and things like that, they kind of had enough to deal with. So that might have been part of the issue. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'd like to definitely invite people to, explore the Jane books, right? People get really big on the Seth books, right? But if you read the Jane books, Adventures in Consciousness, Psychic Politics, The God of Jane, these are amazing. Like, this is like Jane's backstory, which is just as heavily laden with all these incredible insights as the Seth books.
Right. It gives you much more direct information about what she was doing, also with her dreams, out-of-body experiences, her creativity, her poetry. Yeah.
It's like you could almost say, speaking of microcosms, it's like you get that side of Jane's story, which is like, she's like kind of like a Seth in training, right? She's having all these expanding into all of these experiences herself, and having, I remember she's talking about the four-fronted self in one of those books, and starting to really understand multi-personhood, right? And those expansions of consciousness. So those are incredible books. I just want to plug those because sometimes they get overlooked a little bit. They're almost like the other side of the coin of the Seth books, right? You can peek around and see, oh, this is Jane's side of the story, right? So let's go into another question from Helen. Is there a relationship between the concept of self-sabotage and the critical creator self?
Yeah, obviously. Well, it's two-pronged. So absolutely, people are going to self-sabotage as a form of punishment. If on some level they've got a super self saying, you don't deserve this, or you were bad, or you feel guilty about it, or you didn't measure up, so you're going to be punished. So that's definitely one way that self-sabotage connects to that super self and critical self. But I also, and it's a little more involved as a psychological concept, but that's where I wanted to introduce this idea, though, that what looks like self-sabotage from the outside, and it kind of is, but it works to try to protect something from the person. In effect, there can be a kind of, I'll defeat myself before I'm going to let you defeat me.
Yes.
So it doesn't make logical sense, but on an energetic level, it's protecting something. It's protecting an essence of the person.
Like, I'll abandon you before you abandon me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the person has a sense of empowerment, at least until they can gain access to the real choice that they have. And that's often a developmental process. It's kind of like we go through that rebellious period towards our parents, and then maybe ultimately realize, well, maybe we really did want to become a doctor.
Right.
Like our parents wanted, and it's kind of like, but then we do it when we're ready to say, but this is mine, this is my version, and it's okay if other people think it's good for me. That's not why I'm doing it. But that we have to kind of make that differentiation.
Yeah, it's great you mentioned rebellion, because that was one of the commentary in the text and the chats as well. People appreciated your assessment of Jane's smoking as kind of an FU to Seth and to
yeah, right.
So great. So yeah, anything you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say, the other thing about smoking, I mean, talk about psychoactive substances. I mean, nicotine is highly stimulating for the brain. There's a reason why Freud kept smoking cigars even after he had tongue cancer and stuff. It's same thing with caffeine. So there's kind of this thing of like, well, whatever keeps you going, go ahead and utilize it. So. Yeah.
Well, great. So thank you for this lovely exchange. We're coming right into the grand finale here. So what we have left is the meditational closing by Mary Fahy. So once again, I want to say thanks. Thank you, Virginia, for that incredible talk. The thought-provoking, the title, right? People really resonated with that, and sometimes even got triggered by it a little bit, which is all part of the experience.
Thank you, Tom. Right. Thank you, Jeff. I know you're there.
Yeah, so we'll have a closing, but let's shift over to Mary now, Mary Fahy, with a closing meditation.
Again, hello world. Mary Fahy here from London town, full of joy and joie de vivre, however you say that, after the wonderful 2-day conference. So ready now to do our closing meditation. As always, I focus on the breath, and importantly, to get yourself comfortable. Either sitting down, lying down, or sitting on the floor. You know your comfortability zone, so get yourself there. It's a wonderful opener to forget about the physical body while we go into the non-physical part of ourselves, where the magic is. Your hands, the palms of your hands facing upwards. Another gesture in terms of opening to receive. And join with me now in a full, deep breath Through the nose if you can. Breathe in. And hold the breath. 2, 3, 4, and release. A long, slow out breath. Breathing through your mouth. Again, breathe in deeply. Hold the breath in. 2, 3, 4, and release. One more breath now. Breathe in. Hold. 2, 3, 4, and release. Breathing normally now. Physical eyes closing down. Inner eyes opening. Top of the head relaxed. Relaxed. Returning your attention once again to your breath. And this time, imagine breathing in peace. Breathing in peace. Only peace as you begin to slow down. Slow down. Slowing down. And this time as you breathe in peace, allow the body, the breath to move through the body, collecting any fatigue and any emotion you no longer require. Collecting on your breath, preparing to release on a lovely, slow, long out-breath. Fatigue, any emotion no longer required. Breathe it all away. As you breathe in peace and breathing out peace. Allowing the out breath to circle around the body. Just imagine the peacefulness coming into an aura around your body. Peacefulness inside and peacefulness outside. As you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the relaxed state. Checking your mind and your thoughts. Just letting your thoughts come up. Acknowledging them. And then imagine your thoughts just floating right away from you towards the door. Letting them go through the door and leaving them there. You don't need them for now. Coming into this moment, a lovely feeling of deep relaxation moving through you, moving into you and all around you. Heartbeat slowing, pulse rate slowing, mind becoming quieter and quieter. And know from this lovely, relaxed state that the everyday noises of life, people talking, cars driving, doors closing, won't touch you at all. You'll remain enjoying the relaxed state, focusing gently on your breathing. the rhythm of the breath as you breathe in, the rhythm of the breath as you breathe out, knowing that every breath you take is a breath of quality. A sea of calm is touching you now in this deep, relaxed state. Mentally, just repeat with me the words, all is well. All is well. All is well. Focusing now on your forehead area, your inner eyes or your mind's eye, and just imagine looking in front of you and seeing an image of a beautiful place. It's your special place. A garden, a special room, and if you're not familiar with a special place, create one now as you allow your imagination to come out to play. It's a space of beauty, calm, safety, and it is yours. And in this beautiful place, sitting quietly, just allow an image of the 2-day conference that really touched your heart to come into your mind now. Bringing a picture, make the picture brighter, recall the feelings of the words you heard, the person speaking, or it just may be one of the Seth books. And just focus easily, effortlessly on this image for a moment or two. Gently, very gently. Take a deeper breath in. Absorbing the essence of your special place. The recall, the memory, the feelings, all yours. As you allow the images to fade. Breathe a little more deeply. Breathe a little more deeply still. Preparing to coming back into the room with me here. Knowing you can return to your special place anytime, that the wonderful inner world really is just a couple of breaths away. Eyes opening wide, noticing how good you feel. Give yourself a hug and relax with a sigh. Ah, lovely. I'm going to read you a quote now from Seth, and it's from the book NPR, Nature of Personal Reality. Again, the opening meditation was there. He obviously came into my mind for this 2-day conference. And this one is part of chapter 9. It's page 150, and it's about the magic of grace. The magic of grace. Okay, where are we? So quietly, just take the words in at a deep level. You were born into a state of grace. It is impossible for you to leave it. You will die in a state of grace, whether or not special words are spoken for you, or water or oil is poured upon your head. You share this blessing with the animals and all other living things. Grace is a natural state of being. How about that? Words to ponder, to absorb, believe, and live by. Join your hands with me now, owning that divine part, that energetic part that's in you, in me, and each of us. Going forward, expect the joy. Thanks for sharing. Bye-bye for now.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming back here for our final closure. And thank you, Mary Fahy, for sharing your meditational experiences and giving us an update at the beginning of the conference as well. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jeff, for being the co-producer here, behind the scenes, manning all the technology and keeping all the parallel realities lined up so that we can flip from reality to reality and have a lovely experience. Thank you, Virginia, for your talk and for being the host, co-hosting with me as well. And so thank you to all our viewers. It was incredible to create this, and it wouldn't be possible without you because, this is a bubble reality. This is a co-creation. This is something each and every one of you participated in very much, just as much as we have. You created this in your reality, right? So obviously, we've come to a close in linear space-time, but I want to remind everybody that the conference continues. This bubble reality is here. You can plug into this at any time. If you're out there, in the trenches of physical reality and you kind of lose yourself in the illusion, always remember that you can tap into this bubble at any time. And to facilitate that, we are going to release this conference like we did the 2021 conference into 4 video segments, right? That's been a common question. So within a few days, we are going to have a morning section, an afternoon section for day 1, same thing for day 2, 4 video segments. So you can always come back to this energy, whether you do it through your mind and your heart or through physically tuning into our YouTube channel. And so while you're here on our channel, we would definitely appreciate subscribing to support us. And if you want to support the conference in another way, you can always make a donation as well through the California Seth Conference website. So this is a reminder, let's all stay in the magic. Let's not think that this has an end. It has an end in physical time, but it doesn't have an end because time is infinite, right? And we are infinite and eternal beings. So let's stay in that magic. Let's realize that we are the creators of our own reality. Let's share this vibration by demonstrating it in our lives, helping others to realize that we can be the creators of our own reality and to vibrate that out through our personal experience. So this is the 2022 California Seth Conference, getting ready to sign off for now. We're going to wish you pleasant dreams and, as always, happy trails to you.